Isn't she lovely? Love. Isn't she pretty? Truly the angel's best. Isn't it wonderful to have Ben on the show? He's the best. Hey, bud. How's it going?
How's it going?
I should not do that song.
I love your intros. They are awesome.
Well, guys, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and we have a wonderful special guest here in Ben Woodward. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It's good to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. So before we get started, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. The format of the show is quite simple. We're bringing together change makers who are living their passions to create greatness in the world around them. And Ben is short of neither greatness nor passion. So really happy to have him here. Couple of things about live streaming. First of all, we are live. Start a watch party. Ask us questions. I have my team on standby. They'll be shooting questions over. I just want to say this, Ben and I, we have the same publisher for our book, Lion's Crest. And so I reached out to Lion's Crest. I said, hey, who I want some really interesting authors to be on the live stream. So they introduced me to Ben. They sent over his bio. I'm like, oh, this looks so interesting. And so I wanted, before you started the show though, I wanted to dig in a little bit on your background. And I asked Ben, I said, they talk a lot about the book in the bio. I really want to learn more about you. Ben's a speaker, has spoken on many continents, former president of a $100 million company, entrepreneur, and really doing some really interesting things around change making and around some really interesting ways of approaching the world. He's the author of The Empowerment Paradox. I'm going to read this part so I don't screw it up. And he's the author of The Empowerment Paradox and reveals vital virtues that, when developed, provide clarity and understanding for dealing with the complexities of life. So that's I don't know if that's kind of vague, and maybe I should have given some of the background. But if you wouldn't mind, Ben? Number one, man, welcome to the show, my friend. I'm so pumped to have you here.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you. It's really good to be with a fellow Lion's Crest author, man.
Yeah, no, it's like we got our book babies. No, I forgot to ask, when has the book came out yet, or when is it coming out?
Yeah, it came out in July last month, and it did great. It became a bestseller overnight, which was really good.
That's so awesome. So best-selling author now. You can add that to the old resume. But the book's out. You birthed the baby. Now you're out there promoting the book, which is awesome. If you wouldn't mind, I love getting authors on the show. And what I tell people, I go, I'd never written a book until. Is this your first book, or have you written books before this?
It's my first one. Yeah.
So writing a book is a process, and it's quite an achievement. So kudos to you for that. But if you wouldn't mind, maybe tell our audience a little bit about the Empowerment Paradox. How did it come to be, and why did you want to bring this book to the world?
Sure. So the premise of the book is that there is a duality, a coexistence of joy and suffering in life. And often, when we look to create our ideal futures, and especially when we hear people say, let's kind of create the vision board for what does your future ideal self and state look like, people often create this kind of emotional homeostasis where everything is just nice and simple, and the work-life balance is right, my health is perfect, my finances are in order, my relationships are great. They kind of have that ideal scenario, but that removes the essential ingredient of adversity that actually drives us to that point of arrival in the first place. So it explores the necessity of the coexistence of those two, joy and suffering, two sides of a single reality. And then from there, it goes into essential virtues that we need in order to combat the adversity when it comes. One, understanding the essential necessity for it, but then now that it comes, because it's going to come to all of us at some point, how do I respond with strength and use it as an opportunity to find greater purpose, greater meaning, and a sense of transformation to become better as a result versus just get through it. Yeah.
So when, and I love that because I can't remember the quote, but it's something like, the stress on the vine creates the greatest wine, right? Which is this idea that like with stress on these, like when you're making wine, the grapes that really endure the most, like the hardest, environments usually end up, many times end up being the greatest fruit. And so that, I think, kind of the reason I thought of that was this idea around, we want this emotional homeostasis, as you said. And listen, like our body fights for homeostasis, whether it's gaining and losing weight, whether it's,
Yeah.
I just want to, I don't want any stress in my life. How many people say, oh, stress kills, right? And so we just kind of want to, I hate to say this, but kind of be asleep, right?
Yeah.
And we just want to kind of cruise through life. And so what I'm hearing you say is, no, if we want to have this greatness or we want to have these changes, that there is some sort of like pain that goes with that change in order to accomplish, because that's what, if you get out of homeostasis, essentially, it's that you're out of your comfort zone and you're in some area that needs to be adjusted, changed, fixed, call what you want, to end up elevated at a new plateau, if you will. Am I kind of hitting on that the right way?
Yeah, 100%. And also, those opportunities for change and transformation may occur in places where we least expect. Yeah, and that was going back to one of your earlier questions of what brought the book about. Was I experienced some personal adversity that required me to confront some very difficult decisions and choices and situations in my own private life, that as my career blossomed years down the road, aside from that situation, when I got confronted with corporate crisis as a business leader, the experience that I had personally actually brought out some of the best qualities for me to rise up as a leader in a moment of crisis. And that was really interesting for me because I was a young leader at the time. I felt very privileged to be in that position at the age that I was. But what I found was when the crisis hit and the market was suddenly under this moment of, kind of do or die, that the experience from my past actually fueled the opportunity to succeed and thrive commercially. And that was just great to see. And that kind of brought that out in the book. Is sometimes we think we've got disadvantages. A friend of mine once said to me when I was struggling and doubting myself, he said, Ben, he says, do you consider yourself someone with real potential or someone that just grew up on the wrong side of the tracks and got lucky? Yeah. And what I've found is if we feel like we're on the wrong side of the tracks, sometimes that's the best place to be. If we understand how to confront it and respond to it, because that can be a great opportunity for success down the road.
So, and obviously it sounds like you dive into this in your book, but do you mind giving a specifically what happened in your past that you were able to draw from, and maybe how you were able to apply that commercially in the future?
Sure. So, I grew up in New Zealand, and at the age of about 22, I decided in a moment of impulse to jump on a plane, fly over to the UK and catch up with my father, who I hadn't seen since I was 14. I had enough money for a one-way ticket, and I had £50 in my pocket, so not a lot of money going on there. And I flew over with great enthusiasm to reunite. And of course, as you can imagine, anyone that's been separated from their dad from the age of 14 to 22, there's going to be a lot of anticipation, a lot of buildup, a lot of enthusiasm, excitement behind that. And shortly after getting over there and moving in with him, I found out that he was a sex offender, and he hadn't been to prison for it. It was unconvicted crimes. What do you do with that? Where do you go with that? And that, I mean, that created a whole host of difficult decisions for me and a whole host of uncomfortable emotions that I had to confront. And the challenge was I'd gone over to New Zealand, from New Zealand to England. All the family that I grew up with, that I had the close relationships with, that I had bonded with, all of that real strong support system was on the other side of the world. And the consequence of it, what did it mean for me? It meant doing the right thing. I learned in a situation like that, you do what's right, not what's easy. So it meant that I stood by the side of his victims, supported them every step of the way through that process. I facilitated the police investigation and his arrest, testified against him in court, and even drove him to court myself when he went to get locked up. And that was not an easy deal to work with.
Wow. So your father, is your father English or is he from New Zealand?
He's English.
And so did you guys live in England and then move to New Zealand, or did he live in New Zealand and then move to England?
My parents had gotten divorced when I was 3. My mum remarried, and so we were born in the UK, and then I relocated with a second marriage.
Got it. And so you hadn't seen your father in 8 years. You go to the UK to reunite with him.
Mm.
One way or another, you figure out that your father's committed crimes, and you're like, all right, I'm going to go and I'm going to turn him in. And so what did that do to your relationship with him? Like what is that even? I don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, it was complicated. It was complicated because he's got a great way of keeping his cards close to his chest. Perhaps that's a habit that develops over the years when you've got a lot of secrets. Yeah. But it developed a very awkward, superficial relationship. Yeah, there was, because you also had this period of time where in between arrest and the court case, I'm a witness against him in the court case, which means they say don't talk to him, you can't have contact. But that period of time just drags on. It's sort of a 3-month window where you just have to stay away or avoid each other at some point, and that just dragged on. And so, since I went and visited him in prison, kept in contact. And what's been interesting is, and I do kind of refer to this in one of the virtues that I discuss in the book, is the necessity for surrender. And when I talk about surrender, I'm not talking about giving up or giving in. I'm talking about letting go of the illusions in our lives that we put around our sense of self, our circumstances, or our future. And what I needed to do in order to have an appropriate relationship moving forward was to surrender the illusions that I had around who he is, and what that relationship should look like, and what kind of experience I can have moving forward. I also had to go through my own journey of being able to let go of all the hurt, all the offenses, all of the pain that comes with that, so that I can go through that process of sending him to prison with the right motives, the right intent, and the right hopes and expectations.
So your father went to prison, and did your relationship disintegrate? Do you still have a relationship with him? What happened from that? Is he out of prison, or is he still in prison?
He's out of prison now, and it was it kind of disintegrated, came back together, and found its proper place. It's a bit like a pendulum swing, I guess. Yeah, I went over there with great hopes. They kind of crashed and burned, and okay, clearly not what I was expecting here. And then kind of from the ashes, it rose, not to a place that I hoped it would be in the original instance. It's just not going to be that. Yeah. So what we did was we just found, where is the real space for us to exist? And I think he would probably like to have a closer bond, but he needs to put in more effort, which it's on his shoulders to do. So I have my arms open for him to move forward correctly, but I've also been clear and open in my communication with him as to what is required on his part to put things right, and not in a demanding sense. Yeah. Right.
Just in a transparent. You were transparent.
Just being transparent. Yeah. Just being transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so, going back to you're 22. You go to the UK. I had read in your bio that you were also suffering from bipolarism at this time.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't diagnosed at that point. So that was a fun element to grapple with as well. Yeah. So that was an additional insight that gave flavor for me for understanding, because that's actually been for me more complex and complicated than dealing with my father and that relationship and that experience of him going to prison. Because the mind can be a wonderful thing. It can be your best friend, or it can be your worst enemy, depending on what's going on in there. So learning to understand it, getting a proper diagnosis, and learning to respond in a healthy way to managing the symptoms and how it reveals itself, the triggers and so on, so that I can have a productive, meaningful, and rewarding life. It's turned out to be initially overwhelmingly frustrating and despairing. Yeah. Some of my darkest episodes I can't even put into words to describe. But the critical thing is, coming from the other side of that, because the reality is, it's like, what am I going to do with this? You know, I had a therapist say to me once, you can't, clearly you're reading a lot up on the subject, Ben, but you can't educate yourself out of this.
Right, right.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? Because this is an enduring illness. You're going to have this throughout your life. And so again, that's why that principle of surrender is such an important one for me. It was a journey for me to get to the point where I could say, I need to let go of this ideal in my mind that illness doesn't exist.
Right. And so question I want to go to is, you're obviously a very successful person. You were president of $100 million company, speaker from all over the world. Now you're an entrepreneur and an author. And so I got to imagine that when you have that level of, I'm trying to, ambition, maybe it's not the right word. Maybe it's just that level of wanting to achieve, right? Because you don't do those things unless you want to achieve. And
yeah.
Sorry, bro, but it takes one to know one, right?
So yeah, sure.
Too, right? Yeah. So to have that, and on the other side of this is this uncontrollable, I don't even know what to call it, but this uncontrollable thing in your mind that you have to surrender to. How did you come to that ability? How do you surrender to something as strong as that?
Well, first I would have to say that my desire to win and to be the victor over my own circumstances has always trumped my fears. There has always been fears. There's always been trepidation, anxiety, worry, uncertainty around what might lie behind any corner. Yeah. But what has always been stronger than that fear has been my desire to be the master of my own fate. Yeah.
So, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah. And that, I think, just continually pushes me into an uncomfortable space. And I've just learned that's, I can't not be in it. Yeah. Because it's too frustrating to not be. What's the alternative?
Right. No, I just asked because I myself have dealt with issues and not necessarily bipolarism, but I've suffered from anxiety throughout my life, and sometimes to a point where it's fairly debilitating. And I remember at this moment where I was having a lot of anxiety a couple years ago. I mean, like debilitating anxiety. It was like going to bed, waking up, worried about, things that I shouldn't even have been worried about at the level I was. And I had this moment because, and my book's called The Core Value Equation, which is all around the book's about how do you build a core value driven organization. What's come out of that is now I'm living this core value driven life. And that's my next book, by the way.
Nice.
But I had written my core values, and my third core value is I call it Eye of the Tiger. It's around passion. And the last sentence in it is, fight to win. Yeah. And I remember I was having this kind of like, you made me think of that right now when you were just talking, but I was having this moment and I realized that when you have that fight, that like inability to give up, that sometimes that the actual inverse of this, like the jujitsu move on this, is the surrender. And I had this moment where I imagined I was standing in front of a pool and I just fell in, and the whole pool was filled with anxiety. And I was just like floating in anxiety. And I remember the moment I felt that way, my whole body just like kind of went limp and the anxiety went away. And I was like, fight to win, surrender to win. And I added that sentence to my personal core values. So my question for you is, do you see those two as kind of in the same way that I do, that fight and surrender are one and the same? They're just two opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it sounds, surrender just sounds, doesn't it? The connotations of that word sound like giving up. sound like quitting. But real surrender in this context that we're talking about is actually one of the boldest and most courageous virtues to possess, because too many people aren't willing to let go of the false beliefs that they hold on to in order to truly move forward towards their dreams. Yeah, I'd rather have a pretense of reality and hold on to that than accept the brutal facts of what's really going on, so that I can confront it, lean into the pain, and move forward to a better place. Right. Yeah, they're not willing to do that, and that takes courage, and it takes boldness, and it requires a little bit of discomfort. But the outcome is fantastic, or a ton,
or a lot,
or a lot. Yeah. But the outcome is awesome because then you get the real opportunity to get your goals realized. That's not going to happen if I'm holding on into false beliefs.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I love that. So you, a couple things. Like, first of all, you made me think of something else, which is that I found that I have this very strong belief around being really, really straightforward with people and like I am honest to a fault, where sometimes I say too many honest things where it's like I get myself into trouble, right? And I'm not saying I'm like an asshole and I say something like, hey, like, no, you're ugly, man. It's not like that. No, you're beautiful. Yeah. You're beautiful, Ben. But it's not that I do that type of stuff, but maybe I'll be overly transparent and it creates worrisome for someone else. And so I realized, there's a time and place for absolute transparency. Yeah. And so inversely, I realized I lie to myself. I do what you're talking about. And I found that I lie to myself in these really, really complex and manipulative ways to try to keep myself in some specific mindset. And so my question for you is, because that's what I just picked up, that we have these perceptions that are not true, that we keep ourselves in. To the word I use is to stay asleep. Yeah. I don't want to have the awakening moment, because I don't want to deal with the pain of the awakening. Because once you are with awareness comes choice, and I don't want to have to make that choice. Yeah. I don't want to have to choose to like move on to the new life because of the pain that's going to be created in order to go there. And once I wake up, I can't deny that that's the reality now. I can't say that's not true.
Yeah, right? You can't go back.
Yeah, right.
You can never go back to innocence, can you? Once it's lost, it's gone. You can't. Yeah, growing up requires giving something up. Yeah. Right. And that's what we need to do. Yeah.
And I love that. And I always say, I go, man, I wish I was more ignorant, because ignorance is bliss. Right. But I'm not. And I have that other side of it that you're talking about, which is that undying courage to put myself through fucking hell to grow, because the truth comes out. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which is in your book, The Empowerment Paradox, when we talk about virtues, would you mind kind of going through that and talking about the different virtues you dive into and how readers are able to maybe identify? Because I'm assuming are there a set of virtues? Are people's virtues different by person to person? How does that play out?
Yeah, no, I identify 7 essential ones to focus on. Of course, there are a lot, and that gives me the chance for future books to delve into more detail down the road, of course. But these ones are progressive, and they are helpful to us in establishing our own journey to get out of that sleepful state and move forward and confront the tough stuff, so that we can truly achieve what our heart desires. Yeah, and so it actually starts with, the first virtue is a disciplined heart. And I talk about it being a disciplined heart because, in desiring success or achievement in any way, we've got to want the consequences of what we want. Yeah. And so, what that means is, if I want, victory will always require sacrifice, and it will require effort. So I need to want the effort. Yeah. So what happens if I don't? And this was, again, each of these have kind of come through in a subliminal sense, autobiographical journey of mine in dealing with my own personal challenges that I talked about earlier on in our conversation. Is, well, what happens if what I want isn't the right thing? Yeah. What if I want the wrong thing? What happens if I want the right thing, but I don't want it enough? Yeah, because there is quantity and priority. that goes into having our heart and our desires in the right place. So I start there in identifying the necessity for us to train our desires so that we can not just want the right thing, but we can want it in the right way, in the right amount. So from there, we move on to having an educated mind, because critically, having the right heart is not enough. And I saw in some of your previous interviews that you had, as I watched before the call, the critical importance of, there are so many self-proclaimed gurus out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I love them.
And we've got to be careful who we choose to listen to. We live in an information age, and someone rightly said to me the other day, it's also the misinformation age.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to be careful. We need to be educated. And my principle behind this is, wherever we're at, we should have a commitment to level up our education and get smarter. And that journey of learning should be an ongoing, lifelong process. We should never, as soon as we stop learning, I think we damn ourselves. So, constantly pursuing education. From there, having a nourished sense of faith, because at the end of the day, no matter how much I know, I'm not going to know everything in the time that I need it. And It's going to be required of me, be it as a business leader, be it as an entrepreneur, be it as a husband or father or parent or spouse or anyone in any role that I play. At some point in my life, I'm going to have to take a step out into the dark and take a leap of faith. But how do I do that? And critically, if I'm dealing with adversity, because this is the framework that I've kind of couched it in, if I'm dealing with adversity and I need to take a leap of faith, what happens if I've done my research to try to figure out how to get out of this mess that I'm in or solve this complex problem that I'm facing? What if I'm training my desires? I really want it, and I've really studied up on it, and I don't have all the answers, but I don't have the faith to take the step. Yeah, because every action is a consequence of our faith in ourselves or our circumstances, the situation that we're in. So how do I develop that if I don't have any? I really want to get to the grassroots of the virtues. It's not just about saying, this is what it looks like. What happens if I don't have faith, but I need it? Yeah, and that leads on to patience. What happens? It's so easy, isn't it? When someone's suffering, they're having a hard time. Hey, hang in there. Be patient. This time will pass. What happens if I'm not patient? How do I foster and develop that patience? And I love this principle, this virtue. It's one of my favorites. There's an old proverb that says, "In patience possess ye your souls." And I love that. And the antithesis of that is also true. In impatience, we often lose them. We make bad choices, bad decisions, rash choices through impatience. But research has shown, again, coming down to the core level, the basic starting point, what happens if I don't have patience? What if this problem that I'm dealing with, this anxiety or this stress, this worry, this overwhelm, what if it's going on longer than I think I can handle? And I don't feel patient at all. Research has shown that if we can engage our imaginations in an experience that is requiring us to develop patience, we can develop and foster our patience much better than simply relying on grit or white knuckling it with willpower alone. So we explore there. How do we develop and foster the patience, engage our imagination, and expand out so that we can really make progressive, meaningful steps through and up out of whatever we're struggling with?
So let's use that as an example, because these, number one, like, my mind is being blown right now. So thank you for this. But let's say you're going through a really tough situation, like a really, really tough situation. And we'll use, for example, like, because typically when people white knuckle, they're in general, look, I think most people can handle a certain level of stress and they just, white knuckle it out. But I think that there are these moments in life, I certainly have had them where, like, it's pretty unbearable and it goes on and on and on and on. And what I'm hearing you say is that there is and I don't disagree with it. this is more of a question, which is, how do you develop that sense of patience so that when you're confronted, when you're looking down the belly of the beast, dealing with this unbearable situation that's going on and on. Like I've had friends going through these brutal divorces, like brutal. And I see it like take the soul out of their life.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's probably one of the better examples I have is going through a brutal divorce. Their ex is just, dude, every chance they get, just shooting arrows at them. And they, you know, they try to get recalibrated, go back to a normal life. And then they take an arrow in the leg and they pull it out, they fix it, they go back, they got an arrow in their side. Right. And so, you know, how do you develop that sense of patience when potentially A, the worst possible outcome can happen, or B, that you're just dealing with something that you just are tired of and you just don't want to deal with it anymore?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind on that. And the first is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Stockdale paradox.
I've heard of it, but remind me.
Okay. So Admiral Jim Stockdale was the highest ranking military official that was captured during the Vietnam War. And he caught the world's attention for two reasons. One, his rank. You know, he was the highest ranking official that was captured. And when he was captured, by the way, he was in a prisoner of war camp for a good number of years. He saw his friends and colleagues around him die during their time in the camp. He was tortured at least 20 times. You know, this was a horrific ordeal. Yeah, and being a prisoner of war is different to being a regular prisoner. You don't have a release date with being a prisoner of war. Yeah, so think of what that does psychologically when there is no release date. Yeah, and so he caught the world's attention for that reason, but he also caught it for another reason. He came out of that experience a stronger and better person. And so he was being interviewed, and he was asked, how is this possible? Well, first of all, who were the first people to die in the camp? Because it wasn't through malnourishment or anything like that. They died for different reasons. Who were the first people to die? And he said, well, let's break it up into three different categories, the obvious categories, optimist, realist, pessimist. Of those mindsets, who were the first people to fall? And I've asked this question to audiences around the world now, and in every occasion they get it wrong. It's their entrepreneurial environments most of the time. Yeah, so they always go, it's the pessimists. Their bad attitudes sink them, and it's not the case. The optimists are the first to die.
The optimists die. Oh no way!
Optimists die first.
Please tell me us realists live the longest.
The realists live the longest. And,
yes.
and he said this. He said the optimists would do this. They'd say, don't worry about it. We'll be out for Christmas. And then Christmas would come and go and they wouldn't get out. Don't worry about it. We'll be out for Valentine's. We'll be out for Easter. We'll be out for Thanksgiving. These dates would come and go and they wouldn't get out, and it would break their spirit and eventually kill them.
Oh, they couldn't stay optimistic. They
couldn't maintain it because it wasn't founded on correct principles. Their optimism, it was a wish. It wasn't founded on something that was valuable. He said, and they said, so what did you do then that saw you come out not just surviving, but with strength? And this is the paradox. He said, first, I had to accept the brutal facts of my present reality. And this goes to your question here. Yeah, how do I respond and be patient, deal with something when it's so tough? First, I have to accept the brutal facts of my present reality. And second, this is what he chose. For him, it wasn't divorce in that moment. For him in that moment, I'm a prisoner of war. I may get tortured today. One of my friends may die in front of me. Yeah. I don't know when I'm getting out. These are pretty brutal facts. But he said at the other end of the story, he said was that I believed, he said, you always have to believe in the end of your story. And that was for me, not only would I get out, but that I would turn that experience into the defining experience of my life that in retrospect, I would not trade.
Wow.
Now that was an intense vision. So when I talked before about engaging our imagination in order to exercise patience, that's exactly what he did in that situation. He took an environment that was intense. He owned the facts of what's going on in his life, but he turned it into, I've got a vision that I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to survive. And I'm not just going to drag myself through limping and hobbling. I'm going to look back on this and say, I'm not going to trade that for anything. You don't own me. You don't own me.
Oh, wow. 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 I can't believe I haven't. I mean, I've heard of this. I've never heard of it in these terms. And it's so powerful what you just said, because what I just heard you say, the words I just heard you say, were that sometimes you can't control your environment.
Yeah.
Like, and that's a fact of life, right? The bad
Yeah.
things can happen. But what I can control is how I'm going to let it affect my future self. Because I can control that. Like, so let's just say he's like, I'm going to be here for 20 years, but when I get out of this, here's how I'm going to be, because I'm not going to let this own my life. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do we apply that for us right here and now? You know, the challenge is, first of all, accepting part of the brutal facts is it's not easy.
No,
it's not easy. But we do it one step at a time. We can't look at our future state with the ex-wife or the ex-husband creating chaos and shooting those arrows into me left, right, and center and going, this is just my lot for the rest of time. If I take it and turn it into one big thing, then it's too much to handle. But what I can do is respond to the moment. And that's the critical thing. So I can have my long-term vision that I'm going to turn this into the defining moment of my life or experience of my life that in retrospect I wouldn't change. And I'm going to be better and stronger and bigger and all of that. And I'm going to master the moment. And respond to that. Master the moment. And don't stress about tomorrow. Just deal with what you're dealing with right here and now. And if sometimes that's the day, sometimes that's the afternoon, sometimes that's the next hour, sometimes that's the current conversation or the current state of feeling. Yeah. You got to drill it down and just take that next step and move forward from there.
So, number one, man, this is like, I mean, I get to have a lot of cool conversations on this show, but I mean, and I say this all the time whenever I'm having these moments. I'm like, I do this show by myself in a closet if I can get people like you to come on. It's like the coolest conversation. But and my friends say it, they go, man, you look like you're having so much fun. I'm like, you don't even know it, man. I'm loving this because I get to learn from people like you who have done amazing things. You know, you've written your book. I'm so excited to read your book. This sounds so cool. So did we go through all the virtues? Was there any that we missed?
Oh, yeah, we missed a couple of others. Of course, we need the disciplined hard work. That's an important point. We've got an educated mind. You know, we've got the patience, we've got the faith, we've got the trained heart, but we still need to work hard. Yeah. And one thing that I reference in there is, you know, even if you think you're 1 in a million, right? And there's a lot of us that feel that way, which is great. You know, statistically, with 7 billion people on the planet, that still means there's 1,000 other people out there just like you. And if that's the case, what are you going to do to differentiate? Yeah. It's not simply about being awesome. No. You've got to be willing to work hard and pay your dues. So a liberated past is another virtue that I talk about. This need to let go of grudges that we may hold on to, offenses that we hold on to, hurts, disappointments, rejection, all of those things. And of course, if we've made mistakes ourselves, learn to forgive ourselves. It's very hard to move forward into the future to a better state of being if I anchor myself to a definition of who I was versus who I could be. And if I'm striving to become something different, but I refuse to let go of my definition of my former self, it's not going to happen. So we need to be able to let go of that stuff. And that requires me to forgive others. You know, in order for me to move forward in my own life, forgiving my dad was essential as a part of that journey. Because otherwise, lingering definitions and experiences around that are all part of the peripheral, you know, impact of that explosion would continue to impact me and my perception of myself, my perception of life, the world, and my opportunities, all that kind of stuff. I've got to let all of that go. So that's, you know, again, and how do I do that when it's really hard? if I don't want to, if I just don't feel I can. And then the last one is that principle that we talked about before of surrender, letting go of illusions.
Wow, this is so cool. So let me ask you a question. And because I was very curious about when you say the word virtue, what you meant. And so this is a question that kind of dovetails off that, which is my belief from what I just heard you say is that the results we get are defined by how we interact with these different virtues. Right?
Yeah.
And so in my book, The Core Value Equation, I essentially state that core values can become the language of your X, can be the language of your life, that can be the language of the organization. And this book is particularly geared towards high growth organizations. So it's core values have the opportunity to become the language of your organization. And I had this experience with a really wonderful guy by the name of David Zellman. And David he asked me a question and he said, Darius, what do you think creates all the results in your life? And I said, I don't know, maybe it's the actions I take. He said, okay, well, what do you think creates the actions you take? So I guessed like 10 different guesses and got them all wrong. And he said, well, what if I told you it's the conversations that you have? And so I thought about it for a second. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, couldn't I argue, or would you find it absurd for me to say that the conversations we either have internally or externally lead to actions that we take? So okay, I could see that. And therefore leads to the results. So the conversations we have lead to the results that we have in our life. And I said, yeah, okay. It made sense for me. And I kind of started thinking about it, right? So I started thinking, well, what kind of conversations am I having with myself?
Yeah.
And when you were just talking before, I started thinking about those different virtues are a lot of different conversations that are being had internally, right? Like, especially around these ideas of being patient. Am I not being patient? Am I wanting something too bad? How much of it do I want? Right? All these virtues come up through the form of conversation. So the reason I asked that is that about 3 months after I did this work with him, I had this aha moment. Now you're talking to the core value guy, right? So like I'm obsessed with core values and how you use them. That's my tool. And I said, hey, David, I had an epiphany on your whole equation. And he said, well, what's that? I said, well, let me ask you a question. What's a conversation made of? And he said, I don't know, it's like words. I said, yeah, it's like a string of words equals a conversation. And I said, well, what if I told you I believe that the core values can become the language of your life? Therefore, they become the words we choose, which become the actions we take, the conversations we have, which then become the actions we take, which then become the results. Therefore, I believe you're missing part of your equation, which is the core values equal the results. So my question for you is, in my world, core values equal results. So my question is are your virtues, are they different than values in your mind? Or are they a pillar that values interact with? Or are they your values? Are these the values that you believe affect the results in your particular life that are important for you? Is that
Yeah. I think they're an expression of your values. Yeah. Because what they give you the chance to do is demonstrate what really matters most. And it's the effective implementation of your values.
Interesting. Wow. So if my values are these big ideas that I live and die by, conduit for the results is the translation of that value are the virtues by which I play them off of.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, you just changed my life, man. Like,
I love it.
I'm just telling you, man, you just changed my life. Like, you just added a piece to my whole equation. Yeah. Wow. So, well, who knew that was going to happen just now?
I know. Yeah, I love it.
So, look, in closing, number one, man, what a mind-blowing conversation. I really appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation with me. Seriously.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. It's great. Like you said, it's so rewarding to talk about the things that matter most, and to be enriched and informed, to make new connections and make new friends and get the word out on things that can really change and impact people's lives for the better.
Yeah, it for me, it's like, it feels like a calling. That's just one of the reasons why I love this show. It's like, I have the opportunity to meet someone like you, to get to talk, have spent 47 minutes talking about awesome things, to then know that this is now memorialized and people can learn, and they have an opportunity to reach out and learn more from you directly. So that being the case, and so thank you, number one.
Thank you.
And number two, where can people find you? You know, where's the book? I'm assuming the book's in all the traditional places, but where's the book? Where can people find you? What are the things that people can connect with you for? Let it all out.
Sure. So if you want to reach out and connect, ben-woodward.com is my web address. And on there, you'll have all of my social media handles: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. You'll be able to connect and reach out that way as well. If you want to drop me a note and say hi, ask me a question, explore one of the things that we talked about today, I'll be happy to do so as well. And I connect for a whole host of reasons: corporate coaching, business consulting, one-on-one for entrepreneurs if they're wanting to move their business forward, all that kind of stuff. My book, like you said, all the usual places: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those typical venues.
Guys, man, what a special person you are, Ben. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of the Greatness Machine. You are definitely creating some greatness in the world. And it's really like the gift is from, I just got the gift. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Darius. Really, really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, guys, listen, we got more great people coming on this week. Follow us at The Real Darius M on Facebook. You go to my website, www.therealdarius.com, to subscribe to social, subscribe to the show, and obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can see all these shows and then some. So much gratitude here just now. Thank you, Ben. Guys, we'll see you tomorrow, and we out. Peace.